The Montana night swallowed sound. At 6 in the evening on Christmas Eve, the darkness pressed down like something alive. Something with teeth. The kind of darkness that made children pull blankets over their heads and made grown men check their door locks twice before bed. William Brennan knew that darkness. He'd walked through worse. 79 years old, and his body had forgotten what not hurting felt like. The shrapnel lodged in his left femur, a souvenir from December 1950, in a place called Chosin Reservoir, reacted to the 18-degree cold like a living thing. The metal contracted, froze from the inside out. Each step felt like someone was drilling into his marrow with a bit made of ice in memory. Scrape, thump, drag. His wooden cane found purchase on black ice slipped caught again. The cane Martha had given him in 1975 carved with both their initials intertwined. She'd been gone 17 months now. Long enough that the sharp edge of grief had dulled to a constant ache. Not long enough that he'd stopped reaching for her in the morning. Scrape, thump, drag, 4 miles. That's what the signs had said when he'd started this walk. 4 miles from the basement prison his son had locked him in to the only lights he could see through the blizzard. The Timberline Diner sitting off Highway 93 like a beacon for the desperate and the dying. Will was both. The olive green Army field jacket hung loose on shoulders that had lost 41 pounds in 17 months. The fabric, once snug across a frame built by manual labor and stubborn pride, now draped like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. Both elbows were patched with duct tape silver against faded green. The Purple Heart, pinned above the left pocket, caught light from distant windows, flashing like a distress signal nobody was reading. His boots were Sears brand from 1985. Brown leather work boots that had outlasted 3 jobs, 2 knee surgeries and 1 wife. The soles had separated from the uppers 6 months ago. Will had bound them together with wire. No laces. He'd tied them with twine, scavenged from the basement where his son kept him locked away from sunlight and humanity. The wind picked up. Will's breath came out in white clouds that dissolved into falling snow. His hands shook. Not just from cold, though the cold was bad enough. From exhaustion. From dehydration. From the fear that lived in his chest like a second heartbeat. The terror that Derek would come home early from his girlfriend's Christmas party and find the bulkhead door still unlocked. The door Derek had forgotten to padlock when he'd left at 5:30. The door that was always locked. Always, until tonight. Will's right hand went to the inner pocket of his jacket, touched the rectangular shape there. The Sony Walkman, ancient even by 1998 standards, held together with electrical tape and prayers. Martha's last Christmas gift to him before the cancer took her voice, then her strength, then everything else. The Walkman held 7 minutes of recording. 7 minutes of his son's voice explaining how hypothermia was natural causes in elderly veterans. How $427,000 would clear gambling debts and leave plenty for a new life. How winter just needed to get bad enough. 7 minutes of proof that nobody had heard because nobody had come close enough to listen. For 17 months, the system had failed William Brennan at every checkpoint. Social workers who'd spent 8 minutes in his son's house and believed every lie. Pastors who'd been turned away at the door. Neighbors who'd called authorities and been ignored. A mail carrier who'd filed complaints and been reprimanded for her trouble. Tonight, Will was done waiting for the system. Tonight, he was asking for help the only way he had left, if he survived the walk. The diner appeared through the snow like a mirage. Brick buildings squat and solid windows, glowing warm yellow against the night. The parking lot was maybe 2/3 full, cars and trucks, families stopping for hot cocoa before heading to midnight services. Couples sharing pie before driving home to wrap presents. Normal people living normal lives. Will stopped under a corner lamppost. 73 feet between him and warmth. Between him and people. Between him and the last chance he'd probably ever get. His service number ran through his head like it had for 73 years. US 51 724 186. US 51 724 186. The rhythm he repeated when the walls closed in. When the 5-gallon bucket in the corner of the basement reminded him what he'd become. When he couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at him like he was human instead of a problem to be managed. Through the diner windows, Will could see them. 47 people he counted automatically, Old habits from Korea when knowing how many friendlies were in the foxhole next to yours meant the difference between living and dying. Parents and children crowding into red vinyl booths. A waitress refilling coffee cups, her smile visible even from here. An elderly couple holding hands across a table, their wedding rings catching light. The kind of life Will had lived before Martha died, before Derek moved in to help, before the basement became his entire world. Inside the diner, a jukebox started playing Silent Night. Will's legs trembled. He'd been walking for 90 minutes. His core temperature had dropped. He could feel it in the way his thoughts moved slower, the way his fingers wouldn't quite close all the way. Hypothermia didn't announce itself with trumpets. It crept in quiet, lulling you to sleep, with promises that sitting down would feel so good, that closing your eyes was just resting, that the cold wasn't so bad once you stopped fighting it. Will had seen men die that way in Korea. Good men who'd survived Chinese artillery and human wave attacks only to sit down in the snow because walking hurt too much. They'd been asleep in minutes, dead in 20. He couldn't sit down. Not yet. Not when he was this close. The first step toward the diner entrance hurt worse than all the others combined. Something in his left knee popped. The shrapnel in his femur sent lightning up his spine. But he moved. One step, then another. Scrape, thump, drag. A family of 5 emerged from the diner. Mom, dad, 3 kids ranging from maybe 6 to 12. They were loading shopping bags into the back of a Chevy Suburban, wrapped presents visible through the plastic. The kids were laughing about something. The mother was smiling. The father had his arm around the oldest boy's shoulders. Will adjusted his path to intercept them. Not blocking, just visible, just present. Maybe they'd listen. Maybe they'd care that an old man was freezing to death in a parking lot on Christmas Eve. The father saw him first, saw the torn jacket, the hollowed cheeks, the way Will's hands trembled like a drunk's, the wire holding his boots together, the rope-cinching pants that had fit perfectly 18 months ago. The father's expression changed. Something shuddered behind his eyes. His arm tightened on his son's shoulder. "Keep walking, kids." His voice carried across the cold air. Clear, certain. "Don't make eye contact." The mother moved immediately, body between her youngest daughter and Will, shepherding her children toward the vehicle with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd taught them stranger danger since they could walk. Will stopped, mouth half open to say he just needed help, just needed someone to listen. Just needed. The Suburban's door slammed, locks engaged with audible clicks. Thunk, 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 thunk. The father's eyes met Will's for just a second through the windshield. Not cruel, not hateful, just empty. The look you give something unpleasant you're choosing to ignore. They drove away, tires crunching over snow, brake lights flaring red at the parking lot exit. Gone. Will swallowed hard. The cold seemed worse now, deeper, like it had found a crack in his armor and was pouring through. He kept moving. 2 men in business suits emerged from the diner, late 40s, maybe early 50s. Thermal coffee cups in their hands, laughing about something, a joke one of them had told. They looked warm, fed, safe. Will adjusted his path, intercepted them near a rental sedan. "Excuse me, Will started. One man reached for his wallet. Automatic, practiced. The gesture of someone who'd given money to homeless people before and felt virtuous doing it. The other man stopped him, hand on his wrist. "He'll just spend it on booze." The second man looked directly at Will when he said it, making sure Will heard. "Look at him." The first man's hand dropped. His wallet stayed in his pocket. They walked past. One of them deliberately shouldered Will aside. Not hard, but enough. Enough to make him stumble, catch himself on the cane, feel the shame burn hotter than the cold. Will had never touched alcohol in his life, had watched what it did to men in his unit. Men who'd started drinking to forget the things they'd seen and ended up forgetting everything else too. He'd sworn it off at 20 years old and never looked back. But his appearance now told a different story. The unwashed flannel shirt he'd worn for 8 days straight because Derek only brought laundry down once a week if he remembered. The collar stained from hands that shook too much to eat cleanly. The bruise on his temple from where he'd hit his head on the concrete basement wall 11 days ago, purple fading to yellow-green. Will understood why they saw what they saw. It still shattered something inside him. A young couple was loading Christmas presents into a Subaru, Early 20s, the woman wore a Santa hat, the man wore a college sweatshirt, University of Montana. They looked happy. They looked like Will and Martha had looked 50 years ago when the world was new and the future stretched out bright and endless. Will approached slowly, trying not to seem threatening, trying to seem like someone worth helping. The woman saw him first. Her smile vanished like someone had flipped a switch. She hit the key fob. The doors locked. Chunk, 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 chunk. "We already gave at church, buddy." The man said it loudly, not even looking at Will. Hand protective on his girlfriend's shoulder, guiding her into the passenger seat, like Will was something dangerous instead of something broken. Will still had his mouth open, still hadn't spoken a word beyond that first aborted, "Excuse me," to the businessmen. The Subaru pulled away, tires crunching over snow, brake lights at the exit. Gone. Will stood there. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. The cold seeping through the duct tape patches, through the worn fabric, into bones that were 79 years old and had been cold for so long he couldn't remember what warm felt like. What he didn't know was that while he stood there trying to find the courage to keep trying, 120 motorcycles were roaring up Highway 93 North, converging on this exact location for their annual Christmas Eve meal stop before continuing to the Children's Hospital in Helena. What he didn't know was that in exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, his life was about to change. But first he had to survive one more rejection. 3 women emerged from the diner carrying to-go boxes of pie. They wore holiday sweaters decorated with crosses and angels. They were in their 60s and 70s, the age of women who'd raised families and organized charity drives and wore their faith like armor against a world gone dark. Will saw them and thought, these women will help. He stepped into their path, not blocking, just visible. The Purple Heart on his chest caught light again, flashed. The eldest woman stopped, looked Will up and down, took in the torn jacket, the wire-bound boots, the trembling hands. "You should be ashamed." Her voice was sharp, cold as the wind. "Begging on Christmas Eve. The Lord helps those who help themselves. Have you tried getting a bra?" Will opened his mouth, closed it. The other 2 women watched, nodded agreement. A real veteran would have more pride than this. The eldest woman continued. She gestured at his chest, at the Purple Heart he'd bled for. "You're probably one of those stolen valor cases we hear about. Buying medals at pawn shops, pretending you served. It's disgusting." The words hit harder than the cold, harder than hunger, harder than 17 months of Derek's voice telling him nobody cared, nobody would believe him, nobody wanted him. These were women who claimed Christian charity. Women wearing crosses and angels. Women who Will had served to protect 73 years ago when he was 19 and terrified and bleeding in snow exactly like this. Women who now looked at him like he was garbage pretending to be human. The Purple Heart was right there. The medal that came with a citation describing how Private William Eugene Brennan, age 19, had dragged 2 wounded Marines to safety while under direct fire, taking shrapnel that would live in his leg for the next 73 years, creating the wound that made every step tonight an act of will over agony. Right there on his chest, and they didn't believe it was real. Will felt something break inside him that had managed to stay whole through everything else. Through Korea, through Martha's death, through 17 months in a basement, through the 4-mile walk, through every rejection tonight. This broke him. He took one step backward, then another. The women walked past him to their car, still talking among themselves about the homeless problem, about people who won't help themselves, about the real tragedy being that some people just refuse to take responsibility for their own lives. Will turned away from the diner. He'd tried. He'd walked 4 miles in a blizzard. He'd approached strangers. He'd been rejected by a family protecting their children, by businessmen who assumed the worst, by a young couple who'd locked their doors, by church ladies who wore crosses while crushing the last hope of a dying man. He started the slow shuffle back toward the darkness beyond the parking lot, back toward the basement with its 43-degree air and concrete walls weeping moisture and the 5-gallon bucket in the corner. Back toward waiting for Derek to come home, to lock the door again, to forget to bring food for another 3 days while he was at the casino or losing Will's pension money. That's when he heard it. The sound started low, distant, like thunder on the horizon. Then it grew, a rumble that became a roar that became a deafening symphony of 120 motorcycle engines firing in unison, shaking windows, setting off car alarms, announcing arrival like a military convoy hitting a checkpoint. Will turned, headlights swept across the parking lot, dozens of them, more than he could count, chrome gleaming under streetlights, leather cuts with patches reflecting light. The formation pulled in with disciplined precision. Bikes parking in perfect V formation. Riders dismounting in synchronized movements that spoke of years riding together. Of brotherhood forged on long roads and longer nights. Hell's Angels will recognize the patches, the skull logo, the one percenter diamonds. That meant these were men who lived outside normal society's rules. Men most people crossed the street to avoid. Men the church ladies would clutch their purses around. And because Will had just been rejected by everyone who looked safe, by everyone who claimed goodness, by everyone who should have helped, he made a decision that probably saved his life. He started walking toward them. Scrape, thump, drag. The sound of his cane and boots and ruined leg carrying him across 73 feet of snow-covered asphalt, toward 120 men who looked like exactly the kind of people you don't approach in a dark parking lot. But Will had learned something at Chosen Reservoir that most people never learn. Sometimes the dangerous-looking men are the only ones who show up when it matters. Halfway across the lot, he had to stop. The cold, the distance, the 17 months of minimal food. It was too much. He leaned on his cane with both hands, shoulders heaving, breath coming in ragged gasps that turned to white clouds. He could hear Martha's voice in his head. "Stand up straight, William Brennan. You're still a soldier." Will squared his shoulders, lifted his chin. The movement cost him, nearly lost his balance, caught himself on the cane. The bikers were killing their engines now. The sudden quiet after all that noise felt heavy, expectant. Men dismounting, removing helmets, stretching after long rides. Big men, scarred men, men covered in tattoos and leather and the kind of presence that said they'd seen violence and weren't afraid of it. One man stood at the center of the formation. Taller than the others, 6'3" at least, gray beard full and thick, black leather cut covered in patches. The President rocker above the Hells Angels logo. He was pulling off his helmet, running a hand through gray hair. Then he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. An old man, skeleton thin, torn army jacket, moving toward him with obvious pain in every step. Jax Grant turned to face William Brennan. For 3 seconds, they just looked at each other. Jax saw the Purple Heart, the Korea-era field jacket, the wound-based limp. 79 years of carrying weight nobody else could see. Eyes that were still blue, still sharp, still scanning for threats like he was back on that frozen ridge. Will saw the prosthetic left hand visible when Jax adjusted his grip on his helmet. The combat infantry badge pinned above the Hells Angels patch. Dog tags hanging outside the cut that looked old enough to have seen real wars. Eyes that had seen their own battles. 2 veterans, 2 men who understood what service cost. 2 men who'd both lost pieces of themselves in deserts and frozen wastelands on the other side of the world. Will took the final 3 steps, stopped at a respectful distance. 3 feet, military bearing despite exhaustion. Behind Jax, 120 bikers had gone quiet, all watching this old man in duct-taped jacket approaching their president. Will met Jax's eyes, swallowed hard, and said the 11 words that would change everything. "I served at Chosen. I never asked for anything. I'm asking now." Jax froze. Chosen, every veteran knew that word. Chosen Reservoir. December 1950, Marines and armed trapped by 120,000 Chinese troops in negative 35-degree cold. One of the bloodiest fights in American history. Men freezing to death in their own foxholes. Frostbite so bad, amputation became routine. A fighting retreat through 7 divisions of enemy forces. And this man, this skeleton, with shaking hands and Purple Heart had been there. Jax's prosthetic hand came up, not to shake, to salute. Full formal military salute, held for 3 seconds. Behind him, 120 bikers saw it. 73 of them were veterans. 73 hands snapped up in unison. The parking lot of Timberline Diner, Christmas Eve, Montana, snowfall heavy and silent, became a temporary parade ground, honoring a man most of the world had rejected 20 minutes earlier. Will's hand came up automatically. Muscle memory from 73 years ago, returning the salute with fingers that shook but held form. Then Jax did something that broke Will completely. He stepped forward, shrugged out of his leather cut, the sacred garment in motorcycle club culture, the thing you never let non-members touch, the symbol of brotherhood and blood and belonging, and wrapped it around Will's shoulders. The leather was warm from Jax's body heat. It smelled like road and exhaust and something Will couldn't quite name, something that felt like the opposite of alone. "You're with us now, brother." Jax's voice was gravel and smoke and absolute certainty. "Nobody touches our own." Jax's right hand, the flesh one, went to the back of Will's neck. Firm grip, protective. The way you hold someone who's about to collapse but refusing to fall. Jax turned Will toward the diner. Arm around his shoulders, started walking him forward. To his left, a man with razor on his cut and eyes that screamed ex-cop moved to Will's other side. A second wall of protection. The formation changed without a single word spoken. 120 bikers created a moving corridor with Will in the center. Protective spacing, military precision. Nobody was getting through to hurt this old man. Not now, not ever again. They walked him into the diner. The warmth hit Will like a physical thing. His legs nearly gave out right there in the entrance. Jackson Razor caught him, guided him to the corner booth. Back to the wall, tactical position. The kind of seat you give someone who needs to see all exits. The diner had gone completely silent. 47 people staring at 120 bikers surrounding one old man in a torn army jacket. A biker with the name Sawyer on his cut brought coffee, hot, black, pushed it into Will's hands. Will wrapped both hands around the cup, absorbing warmth that felt like the first real heat he'd felt in months. Took a sip, nearly choked because his throat had forgotten what hot liquid felt like. Jack slid into the booth across from him. Several other bikers pulled chairs from nearby tables, moving with quiet purpose, not asking permission, just doing, creating a circle of leather and ink and scars around this corner booth. Jax waited, let Will drink coffee, let warmth seep back into frozen fingers, let the old man's breathing slow from panicked gasps to something closer to normal. 30 seconds passed, 60 seconds. The diner slowly returned to ambient noise. Forks on plates. Quiet conversations resumed, but everyone's still watching. Will set the coffee down. His hands were still shaking, less violently now. "Thank you." Will's voice was rough from cold and disuse. "I'm sorry to bother you. My son's been taking care of me since my wife died. I just needed some air. Walked a bit too far. Got turned around in the snow. I'll head back after I warm up. Don't want to trouble anyone." The words came out rehearsed, practiced, the kind of script someone repeats when they've been coached on what to say if anyone asks questions. Jax didn't respond immediately. He just looked at Will, really looked. At the purple heart on the jacket, at the duct tape holding the elbows together, at the way Will's flannel shirt hung loose on a frame that had clearly lost dangerous amounts of weight. At Will's wrists where faded bruises formed perfect fingerprint patterns, the kind you get when someone grabs you roughly, repeatedly. At the hollowness in Will's cheeks that spoke of weeks, maybe months of insufficient food. At the way Will's pants were cinched with rope instead of a belt because no belt could hold them anymore. Razor caught Jax's eye, tapped his own temple. "Something's wrong here." Pointed subtly at Will's wrists. Jax nodded fractionally. Jax leaned forward, voice gentle despite his size and scars, and the prosthetic hand resting on the table. "Brother, how long since you've eaten a real meal?" Will's composure cracked. Just for a second, a flicker of something desperate and broken crossing his face before the mask came back up. "I eat fine. Derek, that's my son. He makes sure I'm fed." "When's the last time?" Jax pressed quietly. Will's mouth opened, closed. He looked down at his coffee cup. 2 days ago. He's been busy with Christmas preparations. He'll bring something when he... 2 days. Razor repeated it flatly. The ex-cop in him already cataloging details. Already seeing the pattern, another biker appeared at the booth, older than the others, maybe 77, white hair and eyes that had seen their own wars. His cut read, Bishop. I was there too, Bishop said quietly, looking at Will's Purple Heart. Not chosen. I came in 52 after the line stabilized. But I know what that medal means. I know what you gave. Will looked up at Bishop. Something in his face shifted. The recognition of someone who'd seen the same frozen hell, who'd lost the same pieces of youth in the same impossible war. They told me I was stolen valor, Will said, voice breaking. Those women outside, they said I bought this at a pawn shop. Said a real veteran would have more pride than to beg. The temperature in the booth dropped 10 degrees, not from cold, from anger, controlled, directed, righteous. They said what? Razor's voice was very quiet. Will touched the Purple Heart with trembling fingers. I got this at Chosin Reservoir, December 1950. I was 19. Mortar round hit our position, killed 3 men instantly. I dragged 2 wounded Marines to the aid station while Chinese forces were 50 yards away and closing. Took shrapnel in my left femur. It's still in there. 73 years I've carried it. His voice was steady now, not the rehearsed script, the truth. And those women in Christmas sweaters told me I was faking. Jax's prosthetic hand closed into a fist on the table. The mechanical servos made a soft whirring sound. Will, Jax said carefully, why were you asking those people for help? What's going on that you needed help enough to walk God knows how far in a blizzard on Christmas Eve? And that question, asked with gentleness by a man whose appearance screamed danger. In a booth surrounded by 120 bikers who'd made it clear Will was under protection. That broke the last wall. Will reached into his jacket's inner pocket. 3 bikers tensed immediately, hands moving toward waists, then relaxed when they saw what Will was pulling out. A Walkman, ancient Sony, held together with electrical tape and hope. Will placed it on the table between himself and Jax, like it was something sacred and terrible. He keeps me in the basement. Will said it. The words came out flat, exhausted, stripped of emotion because emotion would break him completely. My son Derek, since Martha died 17 months ago, said it was temporary, for renovations, but it's been over a year. The booth had gone absolutely silent. He locks the door from outside. I have a bucket for, he brings food sometimes. Sometimes he forgets. Or he's gone to the casino. I think he took my pension. Power of attorney, took my phone, told everyone I have dementia, that I'm aggressive. So when people tried to check on me, he turned them away. Said I didn't want visitors. Said I was confused. In the background, Oh Holy Night started playing on the jukebox. The irony was not lost on anyone. He took out a life insurance policy on me 6 months ago. Will continued, $427,000. I didn't understand why at the time, but 5 weeks ago I still had this. He touched the Walkman. Christmas gift from Martha, 1998. It has a voice recording function Derek didn't know about. I hid it under my mattress. And one night I heard him in the hallway above the basement, on the phone, talking to someone about money, about timelines, about how hypothermia is natural causes in elderly veterans. Will pressed play. The audio was tinny, distant, recorded through a basement ceiling, but the voice was clear enough. Look, I need 3 more months max. The policy has to mature past 6 months or they'll investigate. It's got to look natural. A pause. Someone else speaking on the other end. Inaudible. 427,000. That's the payout. I clear the gambling debt. Pay you back your 30. I'm set. Old man 79. This winter's brutal. Hypothermia is natural causes at that age. Another pause. I just keep forgetting to turn the heat on down there. Let nature take its course. Insurance companies already confirmed. Exposure death in elderly veteran. No red flags. Will stopped the recording. Looked at Jax with eyes that held 73 years of surviving impossible things. I've been trying to find a way to get this to police, but I can't leave the house. Couldn't leave until tonight. Derek was going to his girlfriend's for Christmas Eve. Forgot to lock the outside bulkhead door. First time in months, so I walked. Didn't know where to go. Just knew I had to try. I saw the lights here. I saw you. His voice stayed steady. And I'm not crazy. I'm not confused. I'm just trapped. I'm 79 years old and it's 18 degrees outside and I walked 4 miles tonight and I can't save myself. The crack came on the last word. Just for a second. The soldier's bearing finally breaking. Can you help me? Jax picked up the Walkman, turned it over in his hands. The prosthetic one and the flesh one looked at this ancient piece of technology holding evidence of premeditated murder. He didn't listen to it again. Didn't need to. He'd seen enough wars, enough betrayal, enough evil wearing the mask of family to recognize truth when he heard it. Jack stood. All 120 bikers stood with him. The movement was synchronized, instant, rehearsed from years of riding together in formation. William Brennan, Jax's voice carried through the suddenly quiet diner. You served at Chosen, one of the bloodiest fights in American history, outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded, negative 35 degrees. You fought your way out of hell, frozen solid. That makes you the toughest son of a bitch in this building. He placed the Walkman carefully in his own jacket pocket. Your son thinks he can murder you for insurance money. He thinks nobody cares about one more old veteran dying in the cold. He thinks the system that's already failed you will keep failing until nature does his work for him. Jax's voice went very quiet, very controlled. He's wrong. Behind him, Razor pulled out his phone. So did a younger guy, maybe 44, with tech on his cut. So did Bishop. So did Sawyer, the combat medic, who'd seen this pattern before. You've got 120 brothers now, Jax continued. We're getting you somewhere safe tonight. Tomorrow we're calling every lawyer, cop, and news station in Montana. And your son, Jax's prosthetic hand clenched. He's going to learn what happens when you try to kill one of ours. Jax extended his right hand, palm down, flat. Will stared at it confused until Jax nodded. Will placed his trembling hand over Jax's. Then Razor's hand covered both. Then Tech's. Then Sawyer's. Then Bishop's. Then every single member of Hell's Angels Montana chapter crowded around that corner booth, hands stacking on hands, forming a tower of calloused, scarred, tattooed protection. It was a patch holder ritual, marking someone as protected by the club. William Brennan, 79 Korean War veteran, was now under the protection of 120 men who just voted unanimously without speaking a single word. Someone in the diner was filming it on their phone. By morning, it would have 14 million views. But right now, Jax was already moving to the next phase. Razor, you still got your badge. Retired, not revoked, Razor answered. His real name was Frank Mason, 62 years old. 23 years with Cascade County Sheriff before he'd retired and found brotherhood on two wheels instead of behind a desk. I know exactly what we need and how to preserve chain of custody. Sawyer, you examine Will, document everything, photograph injuries, assess malnutrition, get body temp if you can. Sawyer was already pulling a small medical kit from his saddlebag. Old habits from military service, always carried supplies. Tech, you get that recording backed up to 3 separate cloud services right now. And I mean right now. Already uploading, Tech said, fingers flying over his phone screen. Google Drive, Dropbox, and my university server. Encrypted, time-stamped, unalterable. Carter, Jax turned to another biker, 56 years old, former high school counselor who specialized in trauma. You stay with Will. Don't let him out of your sight. Keep him calm. Carter moved to sit beside Will in the booth. His voice went soft, gentle. Well, I'm going to stay right here with you. Nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. You're safe now. Jax turned to the rest of the chapter. We need witnesses, people who saw what was happening and said nothing or tried to help and got shut down. We need documentation, banking records, medical records, APS reports, anything that shows pattern and motive. We need his address. And we need to move fast because Will says Derek's at his girlfriend's house for Christmas Eve. Which means we have maybe, Jax checked his watch, 3-4 hours before he comes home and realizes Will's gone. Razor was already on his phone. Calling Sheriff Dixon, we served together in '03, he'll listen. The diner had gone completely silent now, families watching, waitresses frozen mid-pour. The elderly couple who'd been holding hands now staring at this organized mobilization happening in real time. One of the businessmen who'd rejected Will earlier, the one who'd said he'd just spend it on booze, stood up from his booth. I He cleared his throat. All eyes swung to him. I saw him outside. I told my colleague he'd just buy alcohol. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Jax's gaze could have cut steel. You see an elderly veteran in torn clothes on Christmas Eve, and that's your response. I thought I assumed. The man's face was red, ashamed. What can I do to help now? You can sit down and think about why you thought that, Jax said flatly, and next time you can do better. The man sat. The diner stayed silent. Will sat in the center of it all, wrapped in Jax's leather cut, hands around a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm, surrounded by 120 men who decided he was worth protecting. For the first time in 17 months, William Brennan believed he might survive the night. For the first time in 73 years, since a frozen reservoir in Korea, he understood what the word brother really meant. And sitting there in that corner booth, with leather and scars and righteous anger forming a wall around him, Will finally let himself feel something he had thought was gone forever. Hope. Within 15 minutes, the operation was in full swing. Sawyer moved Will to a back booth for privacy. The combat medic worked with equipment that seemed too professional for a biker's saddlebag. Thermometer, blood pressure cuff, pen light checking pupil response. Will sat still. Let the examination happen. After 17 months of having no control over his own body, over when he ate or slept, or used the bathroom, the act of someone asking permission before touching him felt revolutionary. "This okay?" Sawyer asked before checking Will's pulse. "I need to document injuries for the legal case, but only if you're comfortable." Will nodded, couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. Sawyer's fingers were gentle on Will's wrist, counting heartbeats. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes when he felt how thin Will's wrist had become, how the bone stood out sharp enough to cut. "Body temperature 93.2, Sawyer reported quietly to Jax. The president had moved to stand just outside the booth, close enough to hear, far enough to give Will space. "That's mild hypothermia. Another hour outside, maybe 90 minutes, we'd be looking at severe hypothermia, possibly fatal, given his age and condition." "Malnutrition?" Jax asked. "Severe." Sawyer lifted Will's shirt gently. Will flinched, not from pain, from the shame of being seen like this, ribs showing through skin like piano keys. "I'd estimate he's lost 35 to 45 pounds based on how his clothes fit and the muscle wasting I'm seeing. Dehydration, signs of vitamin deficiency, his gums are pale, skin's got that papery quality." Sawyer pulled out his phone. "I'm going to photograph the bruises for evidence." "That okay, Will?" "Yes." The camera clicked, capturing the yellowish bruise on Will's temple, the fingerprint patterns on his wrists in various stages of healing, purple fading to green, fading to yellow, a timeline of violence written on skin. "These bruises on the wrists," Sawyer said for the recording, "consistent with being grabbed forcefully, repeatedly, finger-shaped patterns, multiple ages of healing. This one," he pointed to the temple bruise, "approximately 11 days old based on color, consistent with impact against hard surface, possibly concrete. Evidence, documentation, the kind that would hold up in court." Razor had stepped outside, phone pressed to his ear, speaking with someone named Sheriff Dixon. "Dave, it's Frank Mason. I know. Merry Christmas to you, too. Listen, I need you to hear me out because I'm standing in a parking lot with a recording of attempted murder, and about 4 hours before the suspect realizes his victim escaped." The conversation lasted 8 minutes. When Razor came back inside, his expression was grim but determined. "Dixon is sending 2 deputies, Razor announced. Then he held up a hand. "But he needs witnesses. He needs documentation of prior system failures. He needs more than just the recording, because a good defense attorney will claim it's out of context or illegally obtained. We need to build an airtight case right now tonight before Derek Brennan realizes what's happening." Jax nodded. "Then we get witnesses." He turned to Will. "What's your address?" 1847 Pinewood Ridge Road." "Who are your neighbors? Who else tried to help?" Will's hands twisted together. After 17 months of being told he was crazy, confused, a burden, the act of having someone believe him enough to ask for details felt surreal. Maggie Walsh next door, 1845 Pinewood Ridge. She called Adult Protective Services 4 months ago. They came, but Derek was home, had me coached on what to say. I was too afraid to contradict him. Anyone else? Reverend Coleman tried to visit 3 times. Derek turned him away, told him I didn't want church people anymore. Which church? Frost Hollow Community Church. Reverend's probably home for Christmas Eve service prep. Tech was already looking up numbers on his phone. Got it. Frost Hollow Community Church, Reverend Jonathan Coleman. Calling now. There's a mail carrier too, Will added. His voice was getting stronger. Having people listen, really listen, was like oxygen after drowning. Linda something, she saw me in the basement window about 6 weeks ago, filed a complaint with the Postal Service. Derek threatened to sue her. She got reprimanded by her supervisor. Razor's jaw clenched. She got punished for trying to help. Derek told them she was harassing us. Will's hands shook. Everyone who tried to help got shut down, punished, silenced. And I was locked in that basement, and I couldn't do anything. Carter's hand came down on Will's shoulder, steady, grounding. You're doing something now. You walked 4 miles in a blizzard. You found us. You're fighting back. That takes more courage than most people have. 23 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. They walked into a diner full of bikers surrounding one elderly man. To their credit, they didn't immediately go defensive, didn't put hands on weapons, didn't start barking orders. Razor met them at the door, hands visible, posture non-threatening but confident, the body language of someone who'd worn a badge himself and knew the protocol. Deputies, Frank Mason, retired, Cascade County. This is a welfare check turned attempted murder investigation. We have audio evidence, witness statements in progress, and a victim who needs immediate protective custody. The taller deputy name tag read Harris looked past Razor at the scene. At Will in the corner booth wrapped in Jax's leather cut. At Sawyer checking vitals. At 120 bikers standing in protective formation, but not moving, not threatening, just present. Sheriff Dixon briefed us, Harris said carefully, said you had credible evidence of elder abuse and fraud. And premeditated attempted murder, Razor added. Want to hear the recording? While the deputies listened to Derek's voice explaining how hypothermia was natural causes and $427,000 was worth waiting 3 more months for other pieces of the operation were falling into place. Tech had reached Reverend Coleman. The pastor had left his Christmas Eve service prep immediately upon hearing Will's name and the words attempted murder. He was driving to the diner now. ETA 12 minutes. A second call had gone out to Maggie Walsh, Will's neighbor. She'd been hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation, afraid of getting involved. Until Razor had explained that Will was safe, that law enforcement was involved, that this was her chance to tell the truth without fear. She agreed to come. ETA 18 minutes. Jax had made a third call himself, to a lawyer named Judith Porter, 61, who specialized in elder abuse cases and didn't mind getting woken up at 7:43 p.m. on Christmas Eve when the words of veteran, basement prison, and insurance fraud were involved. She was on her way, ETA 34 minutes from Helena. The net was closing. Maggie Walsh arrived first. She was 71. She was 71, silver-haired, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. She'd lived at 1845 Pinewood Ridge for 33 years. Knew Will, knew Martha, knew what their life had looked like before Derek moved in. She walked into the diner and saw Will, and her hand went to her mouth. "Oh, Will," the words came out choked. "Oh my God, you're so thin." Deputy Harris guided her to a quiet booth, pulled out a recording device. "Mrs. Walsh, I need you to tell me everything you saw, everything you heard, everything you reported. This is an official statement." Maggie's hands shook, but her voice was steady. "I've lived next to Will Brennan for 33 years. After Martha died, Derek moved in. At first, it seemed fine. A son helping his elderly father. But about 14 months ago, I started noticing changes." "What kind of changes?" "Will stopped coming outside completely. I used to see him getting mail, working in his garden, walking to check on but his truck. After Derek moved in, nothing. When I asked Derek about it, He said Will was struggling with grief, preferred solitude. I believed him for a while. When did you stop believing him? Maggie pulled a tissue from her purse, dabbed at her eyes. 8 months ago, I saw Will's face in the basement window, the small one near ground level, the one that faces my property. He looked terrified. He was mouthing something. I think it was help me. She took a shaky breath. I called Adult Protective Services, filed a formal report, said I'd seen evidence of possible confinement, that I'd heard Will crying through the window on 3 separate occasions, that his weight loss was visible even from a distance. What happened with that report? An investigator came, Thomas Weiland. He spent 8 minutes at the house. Derek was home, showed him an upstairs bedroom, said that's where Will lived. Will was there, coached to say he was fine. The investigator never checked the basement, never asked to see the rest of the house. Case closed as unsubstantiated. Her voice broke. I failed him. I called the people who are supposed to protect vulnerable adults, and they spent 8 minutes and left. I didn't know what else to do. Harris wrote every word. Mrs. Walsh, this isn't your failure. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. The system failed. You're helping fix that now. Reverend Coleman arrived next, 64 years old, salt and pepper hair, kind eyes that had seen their share of suffering. He'd known Will Brennan for 31 years, had presided over Martha's funeral, had watched a good man crumble under grief and then disappear. His statement was equally damning. Will stopped attending services 14 months ago. After 31 years of never missing a Sunday unless he was physically hospitalized, he just vanished. I attempted 3 home visits between April and June of this year. What happened? First visit, April 14th. Derek answered the door, said Will was sleeping, had a bad morning, couldn't receive visitors. I asked if I could wait. Derek said no, that Will had given specific instructions not to be disturbed. Coleman's fingers tightened on the coffee cup one of the bikers had brought him. Second visit, May 3rd. Derek said Will didn't want visitors, that he was going through a difficult time processing Martha's death and needed space. I offered grief counseling. Derek said Will wasn't interested. Third visit, the Reverend's face hardened. June 12th, I was persistent because this wasn't like Will. He'd always welcomed church support. Always. Derek became hostile. Said Will had specifically said he didn't want church people bothering him anymore. Threatened to call the police if I came back. Said I was trespassing. Did you believe him? I wanted to. Coleman's voice went quiet. I wanted to believe that grief had changed Will, that he needed space, that he was capable of making his own choices. I tried calling the house phone. It rang unanswered. I sent letters, never got responses. Eventually He paused, swallowed hard. I told myself Will was an adult, that maybe grief had changed him. I backed off. I stopped trying. You feel guilty, Harris said. It wasn't a question. I should have tried harder. I should have known something was wrong. I'm a pastor. I'm supposed to know when my congregation is suffering. You tried 3 times. Most people don't try once. Your statement here is helping save his life. By 8:15 p.m., the picture was devastatingly clear. Deputy Harris had statements from Maggie Walsh and Reverend Coleman. He had Will's own testimony. He had the recording. He had Sawyer's medical documentation showing hypothermia, malnutrition, bruising consistent with grab marks. Tech had pulled Derek Brennan's social media. Facebook posts showing him at Billings Casino on the weekends. He'd told Reverend Coleman Will was too ill for church. Photos of Derek's new Ford F-150. Kitchen renovation pictures dated July 2024 with captions about upgrading while Dad's comfortable, while Will froze in a basement. Razor had called in a favor with a contact at the bank. Obtained technically without warrant but admissible under exigent circumstances, records showing Derek had withdrawn Will's full pension and Social Security every month for 17 months. Total $481 monthly. 17 months, $8,177. Almost none of it spent on Will's care. Judith Porter, the lawyer, arrived and was already drafting emergency protective orders and filing for emergency custody removal. Sheriff Dixon called Deputy Harris directly. We've got enough. Go pick him up. I'm issuing an APB for Derek Matthew Brennan, 47 years old. Last seen at girlfriend's residence. Consider him a flight risk given the financial motive. Harris looked at Jax. Where's the girlfriend live? Will do, Jax asked gently. Will nodded. His voice was stronger now, fed by coffee and warmth and the knowledge that people were listening. Stephanie Marks. Lives behind Mike's gambling den on the east side of town. Derek bragged about her once, said she worked there as a dealer. Razor was already looking up addresses on his phone. Got it. 847 Industrial Avenue, Apartment 3B. Harris radioed to his partner. Let's go. They found Derek Matthew Brennan at 8:47 p.m., barely 3 hours after Will had walked into that diner parking lot. Derek was in Stephanie's living room wearing sweatpants and a Billings Casino t-shirt, eating leftover Chinese food, watching a James Bond marathon on TV. The same hands that had grabbed his father hard enough to leave bruises were holding chopsticks. The same mouth that had planned murder for insurance money was chewing lo mein. When the deputies knocked, Derek answered with mild annoyance. Probably thought it was a noise complaint. Maybe the downstairs neighbor upset about the television volume. Derek Brennan. Yeah, you're under arrest. Turn around. Hands behind your back. What? Derek's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, anger, fear, calculation. This is ridiculous. What's the charge? Harris's voice was flat, professional, devoid of emotion. Felony assault, criminal, elder abuse, grand theft, fraud, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Derek's calculation shifted. This is about my dad, isn't it? Did someone call you? He's confused. He has dementia. I have a doctor's note. The doctor's note is forged, Harris said. We know. Turn around. I want my lawyer. You'll get one. Turn around now. Derek turned. Harris cuffed him. Hands wrenched behind back. Metal clicking shut exactly the way it's supposed to happen when someone who planned to murder their father gets taken into custody on Christmas Eve. They walked him out in his sweatpants and casino shirt. Past neighbors staring from windows. Past Stephanie crying in the doorway asking what was happening. What did he do? This has to be a mistake. Past the Billings Casino poster on the wall advertising New Year's Eve promotions. Past the new TV that had been purchased with Will's pension money. Past the stack of bills on the counter that would never get paid because Derek was about to spend the next decade in state prison. The deputies guided Derek into the patrol car. That moment when they put their hand on top of a suspect's head. The small indignity that happens when you're being arrested for trying to freeze your father to death for insurance money. Derek's bail would be set at $250,000, high enough that a man who'd stolen $8,177 and gambled most of it away, who had $127,000 in debt and zero legitimate income, wouldn't be making it anytime soon. Back at the diner at 9:03 p.m., Jax's phone rang. Sheriff Dixon. We got him, en route to booking. Now the recording alone would have been shaky, but with the witness statements, the financial records, the medical documentation, this is airtight. DA's going to love this case. Jax looked at Will, still sitting in that corner booth, Carter beside him, Sawyer monitoring his vitals, surrounded by 120 bikers who'd decided he was worth protecting. Will, Jax said quietly, Derek's in custody. He's not coming home. He can't hurt you anymore. Will stared at him, the information taking several seconds to process, like his brain couldn't quite accept that after 17 months of imprisonment, 3 hours of action had ended it. He's arrested. Felony assault, elder abuse, grand theft, fraud, attempted murder. He's facing 8 to 15 years in state prison, no parole eligibility for 5. And that's if the DA shows mercy, which based on what Dixon just said isn't likely. Will's hands started shaking again. Not from cold this time, from the weight of 17 months lifting all at once. I'm not going back to the basement. Never. He can't lock the door. Never again. Will's breath came faster, hyperventilating. Carter's hand came down on his shoulder. Grounding. Will breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. You're safe. You're here. He's in jail. You're safe. Judith Porter appeared at the booth, sharp eyes, no-nonsense demeanor, the kind of lawyer who'd built a career on cases nobody else wanted to touch. Mr. Brennan, I'm Judith Porter. I specialize in elder abuse law. I've already filed emergency protective orders. The house is yours. Derek can't go within 500 feet of you. I'm also filing to revoke his power of attorney and get you back control of your finances. Will looked at her. I don't I don't have anywhere to stay tonight. The basement is, Bishop spoke up. 77 years old, club founder. Korean War veteran himself from the '52 campaign. Voice rough with age and cigarettes and roads traveled. You're staying with me, Bishop said firmly. I've got a guest house. It's warm. It's got a real bed. It's got a bathroom, no buckets. You're staying there until we get your house cleaned up and safe. Carter added, we're taking you to Helena Regional Medical tonight. You need IV fluids. You need proper nutrition reintroduction. You need to be examined by doctors who can document everything for the legal case. Sawyer nodded. I'll ride with you. Make sure they understand the full scope. Will looked around at these men, these dangerous, scarred, leather-wearing men who'd taken one look at a broken veteran and decided he was worth an entire night's mobilization. Why? Will's voice was very small, like a child's. Why would you do all this for me? Jax leaned forward. The president, the man with the prosthetic hand and combat infantry badge. The man who'd saluted when he heard I served at Chosen. Because you earned that Purple Heart. Because you carry shrapnel from 1950 and you're still standing. Because your son thought nobody would care about one more old veteran freezing to death. And he needed to learn he was wrong. Jax placed his prosthetic hand over Will's real one, the mechanical fingers cool against warm skin. Because brotherhood doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Because every single man in this room has been where you are. Maybe not locked in a basement, but trapped. Failed by systems that should protect us. Betrayed by people we trusted. We know what it's like when the world looks away. His voice went softer. So we don't look away. Not from our own, not ever. The room went quiet, 120 men voting unanimously in that silence. Outside, someone's phone pinged. The video of 120 bikers stacking hands over an old veteran in a diner booth had just hit 3 million views. By morning, it would be 14 million. By next week, it would be 42 million. But inside, Will Brennan was crying. Not from despair this time. Not from pain or fear or the weight of 17 months in a basement with a bucket and concrete walls. He was crying from the overwhelming weight of being seen, being believed, being protected by an army of strangers who decided he wasn't a stranger at all. Justice had been served. Derek was in custody. Evidence was preserved. Witnesses had spoken. But justice wasn't the ending. It was only the beginning. The convoy that would take Will to Helena Regional Medical Center was forming in the parking lot. 20 bikes, enough to make a statement, but not overwhelm the ER staff. Jax walked Will to the door. The leather cuts still wrapped around the old man's shoulders. Will tried to take it off. Return it. Keep it, Jax said, until we get you your own. I can't be a member. I don't ride. I'm 79 years old and you don't need to ride to be family. Jax's hand came down on Will's shoulder. You need to show up. You already did that. You walked 4 miles in a blizzard. You asked for help when asking felt impossible. That's more courage than most people show in a lifetime. The night air hit them when they stepped outside. Still 18 degrees, still snowing. But Will wasn't alone anymore. 20 bikers mounted up, engines firing. The sound that had terrified him 3 hours ago now sounded like protection, like safety. Like the cavalry arriving when all hope was lost. Sawyer helped Will into a truck, the medical transport they'd arranged, heated seats, blankets, water bottles. Hospital's 47 miles, Sawyer said, but we'll be there in under an hour. You just rest. We've got you. The convoy pulled out, 20 motorcycles escorting one truck through Montana snow, headlights cutting through darkness, chrome gleaming. Will sat in the passenger seat, Jax's leather cut still wrapped around him, watching the bikes ride formation around the truck, protecting him even now, even when the danger had passed. He thought about Derek, sitting in a county jail cell right now, probably still in his sweatpants and casino shirt, probably still trying to figure out how it all fell apart so fast. Will felt no satisfaction, no joy, just the exhausted relief of a war finally ending. Behind them back at Timberline Diner, the remaining 100 bikers were making calls, coordinating, planning. Because getting Derek arrested was only step one. Getting Will healed was going to take longer. Getting Will's life back was going to take everything they had. But looking at the faces around that diner, at men who'd dropped everything on Christmas Eve to save a stranger at Brothers, who'd voted unanimously to protect one of their own, they had everything Will needed. And then some. The hospital lights appeared on the horizon, bright against dark sky. Will's hands had stopped shaking. His breathing had normalized. The hypothermia was fading. But the real healing, the kind that happened in hearts broken by betrayal and souls crushed by isolation, that would take time. Good thing Will had 120 brothers who just cleared their schedules. Good thing brotherhood didn't end when the uniform came off. Good thing sometimes the most dangerous-looking men in the parking lot were exactly who you needed. Will closed his eyes, let himself rest for the first time in 17 months without fear that he wouldn't wake up, without terror that the door would stay locked forever, without the crushing certainty that nobody cared if he lived or died. He was wrong about that last part. 120 people cared, and they'd just proven it in the only way that mattered, by showing up, by staying, by refusing to look away when the world said it was easier to pretend they didn't see. The convoy rolled through the night, 20 bikes and one truck, carrying one old veteran toward healing, toward hope, toward a future he thought was gone forever. Behind them in a county jail cell, Derek Brennan was learning the hardest lesson of his life. You don't get to murder veterans for insurance money. Not on Christmas Eve. Not when 120 brothers are watching. Not ever. Helena Regional Medical Center was 47 miles from Frost Hollow. The convoy of motorcycles that escorted Will there, 20 bikes enough to make a statement, but not overwhelm the ER staff, arrived at 10:34 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Sawyer walked Will through intake. Translating medical observations into terminology the ER nurses understood, making sure they knew this wasn't just hypothermia. This was 17 months of systematic abuse compressed into one night of documentation. 79-year-old male Korean War veteran presenting with mild hypothermia, severe malnutrition, dehydration, evidence of long-term elder abuse and confinement. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Vance, 42 years old, took one look at Will's vitals and immediately ordered IV fluids, warming blankets, and a full metabolic panel. "Mr. Brennan," she said, gently examining the bruises Sawyer had photographed earlier, "we're going to take very good care of you. But I need to know, do you feel safe right now? Is there anyone you're afraid of?" Will shook his head. For the first time in 17 months, the answer was no. "My son is in jail," Will said quietly. And then looking at Sawyer standing in the doorway at Jack's, who'd insisted on staying at Carter, who'd refused to leave Will's side, he added, "And I have people." Vance nodded, writing notes. "You certainly do." The medical examination took 4 hours. Will had lost 41 pounds since Derek had taken control, documented by comparing his current weight, 127 pounds, against VA records from 18 months prior, showing 168. His body temperature normalized to 97.1 degrees after 2 hours under warming blankets and hot fluids running through an IV. Blood work showed vitamin D deficiency, anemia, and early signs of muscle wasting consistent with prolonged malnutrition. The kind of wasting that happened when a body started cannibalizing muscle tissue for energy because there was nothing else left. Dr. Vance told Jax quietly outside Will's room what the numbers meant. Another 2 weeks in those conditions, maybe 3, his body was shutting down. The hypothermia exposure tonight could have been fatal, given his compromised state. "But he'll recover?" Jax asked. "Physically, yes, with proper nutrition, environment, and care. Psychologically," she hesitated, "that's going to take longer. 17 months of isolation and abuse doesn't heal overnight. He'll need trauma counseling, probably ongoing therapy for PTSD, both from the war and from what his son did to him." "We'll make sure he gets it," Jack said, and he meant it. By 2:47 a.m. on Christmas morning, Will was admitted for overnight observation, sleeping in a warm bed with IV fluids running and monitors tracking vitals that were finally stabilizing. Jack's Razor, Sawyer, Carter Tech, and Bishop Tears sat in the hospital cafeteria drinking terrible coffee and planning next steps. Housing first, Razor said, ticking items off on his fingers. Bishop, you said he could stay with you. Guest house is ready, Bishop confirmed. Heat's on, bed's made, stock the fridge this afternoon. He can stay as long as he needs. Financial recovery, Tech added. Judith Porter said she can get the power of attorney revoked by end of week. Get Will's accounts unfrozen. But the money Derek already spent, the $8,177, that's harder to recover. We'll do a fundraiser, Jack said. Chapter's done them before. We raise what was stolen, put it back in his account. Razor nodded. Legal support. Trial's going to be brutal. Will's going to have to testify. We need to make sure he's got support through that process. I'll handle it, Carter said. Trauma-informed support is what I did for 20 years. I'll prep him, be there for every court appearance, help him process. Sawyer leaned back in his chair. Medical follow-up. He needs regular check-ins, nutritionist, physical therapy for that leg that's been overcompensating for decades. Dental work, probably. VA should cover most of it, but navigating VA bureaucracy is its own war. I'll run interference, Razor said. I know people at the Montana VA office. I'll make sure Will gets every benefit he's entitled to. Bishop spoke quietly, the oldest among them, the one who'd seen this pattern before, in Korea, in the years after, in the faces of men who came home broken and stayed broken because nobody cared enough to help them heal. What he really needs is to know that he's not alone. That's what'll heal him more than anything else. Community, belonging, knowing people give a damn. Jax looked at his brothers, ex-cop, combat medic, counselor, tech specialist, elder statesman, each one bringing skills Will needed, each one ready to deploy those skills without hesitation. Then that's what we give him, Jax said, for as long as it takes. 3 days later, Will was discharged from Helena Regional with a care plan that looked like a military operation. Bishop picked him up in his truck, drove him to the guest house at 1632 Silverwood Lane, a small cabin-style home behind Bishop's main house. 1 bedroom, full kitchen, bathroom with grab bars Bishop had installed the day before. It's not fancy, Bishop said, unlocking the door, but it's warm, and it's yours for as long as you need. Will walked in and stopped. The guest house was decorated, not lavishly, but thoughtfully. A small Christmas tree in the corner with lights glowing. A welcome basket on the kitchen counter with coffee bread, soup crackers, simple foods for a system relearning how to eat. A handmade quilt on the bed. Turned out Tech's wife had sewn it in 2 days when she heard the story. Blue and gray squares, stars stitched in the corners. On the mantel above the small fireplace, Will's wooden cane, the one he'd used to cross that parking lot. Jax had taken it from the hospital, mounted it on a simple wooden plaque with an inscription. Gift from William Brennan, the Reservoir Survivor. Christmas Eve 2024. Brotherhood answers. Will touched the cane with shaking fingers. Started to cry for the 3rd time in 79 years. First time at Chosen when his best friend died in his arms. 2nd time when Martha passed. 3rd time now standing in a warm house provided by strangers who'd become brothers. It's too much, Will whispered. I don't deserve. Stop, Bishop's voice was firm. You survived one of the worst battles in American history. You survived 17 months of torture by your own son. You walked 4 miles in a blizzard to save yourself when everyone else had given up. You've earned every damn thing in this room and more. Will nodded, unable to speak. Dinner's at 6 every night, Bishop continued. At my place. You don't cook until you're stronger. You just show up and eat. Understood. Yes, sir. Bishop moved to the door, showed Will the lock. See this? It only locks from the inside. You control when you come and go, nobody else. You want to leave at 3 in the morning, you leave. You want to stay in bed all day, you stay. Your choice. Always your choice. That detail, that small, critical detail. It broke something loose in Will's chest. Freedom, autonomy, control over his own movement for the first time in 17 months. Thank you, Will managed. Bishop gripped his shoulder. Welcome home, brother. The legal process ground forward with inevitable momentum. Judith Porter filed emergency motions and had Will's power of attorney revoked within 5 days. His bank accounts were unfrozen. Derek's withdrawals were frozen pending trial. Restraining order filed and served while Derek sat in county jail on $250,000 bail he couldn't make. The district attorney, Michael Torres, 53 career prosecutor, called the case one of the most clear-cut examples of elder abuse and financial exploitation I've seen in 20 years. He filed charges, felony assault criminal, elder abuse, grand theft, 8,100 insurance fraud, and attempted murder. Maximum sentence if convicted on all counts, 15 years state prison. Trial date set for March 17, 2025. While the legal machinery turned Will's recovery happened in smaller, quieter moments. Carter drove Will to his first therapy appointment at the VA, sat in the waiting room for 90 minutes, drove him home after, didn't ask questions, just said, same time next week. Sawyer accompanied Will to nutritionist appointments, helped him understand refeeding protocols. Small meals 6 times daily. Gradual calorie increases to avoid refeeding syndrome, the dangerous condition that happens when a starved body gets food too fast. Tech helped Will set up a new phone with his contacts restored, showed him how to video call his brother in Alaska, who'd been told Will was too confused to talk and believed it until Will called crying and explained everything. Razor went with Will to the VA benefits office, navigated paperwork to ensure Will's pension was redirected to his newly unfrozen account, helped him apply for additional aid and attendance benefits he'd been eligible for but never claimed. Jack stopped by every Thursday evening, always bringing something. Sometimes it was just coffee, sometimes motorcycle magazines, sometimes just silence, sitting on Bishop's porch watching Montana sunsets. And every night at 6 p.m., we'll walk from the guest house to Bishop's main house for dinner. At first, the walk was slow, exhausting, requiring the wooden cane, but after 3 weeks, faster. After 6 weeks, he left the cane at home some days. Brotherhood in action, not grand gestures, just consistent daily presence. The fundraiser happened on February 8, 2025. Hells Angels chapters across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho organized a benefit ride. Starting Point Timberline Diner, the place where it all began. 317 motorcycles showed up. Entry fee suggested donation $50, but pay what you can. They raised $84,230 in one day. Minus expenses for permits and the barbecue lunch, they provided $82,470, more than Derek had stolen. Every penny went into Will's restored account. When Razor called to tell him as a number, Will sat down on Bishop's couch and didn't speak for 2 full minutes. I don't understand, Will finally said. Most of those people have never met me. Razor's voice was gentle through the phone. They know what you represent. Every veteran who got chewed up and spit out. Every person the system failed. Every time someone vulnerable needed help and nobody came. You're not just Will Brennan anymore. You're proof that sometimes somebody does show up. Will held the phone to his ear long after Razor hung up, staring at the number on the bank statement Judith had emailed him. $82,470, more than 10 times what Derek had stolen. Given by people who'd never met him, who'd heard a story about an old veteran locked in a basement and decided that wasn't acceptable, that he mattered, that brotherhood meant something. Will cried for what might have been the 4th time, or maybe the 10th. He'd stopped counting. March 17th, 2025 arrived cold and clear. Trial day. Will stood in the parking lot of Cascade County Courthouse wearing a new suit, bought 2 days prior with Carter's help. Navy blue, fit properly, made him look like the man he'd been before Derek locked him away. Carter stood on his left, Jack's on his right. You don't have to do this, Carter said quietly. Prosecutor says they have enough without your testimony. I need to, Will said. I need to look at him. I need him to hear me say what he did. They walked inside. The courtroom was packed. Media in the back rows, Maggie Walsh and Reverend Coleman sitting together, Linda Brooks, the mail carrier, Bishop and Razor and Sawyer and Tech, 20 other bikers who'd taken the day off work to be there. Derek sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. 4 months in county jail had aged him a decade, his hair graying at the temples, his face hollowed. The consequences of trying to murder his father for money etched into every line. When Derek's eyes met Will's, something flickered there. Not remorse, recognition maybe, the understanding that he'd miscalculated, that his father wasn't as alone as he'd thought. The trial lasted 3 days. Maggie testified about the basement window, about the face mouthing, "Help me," about the APS investigator who'd spent 8 minutes and left. Reverend Coleman testified about 3 attempted visits, about being turned away, about threats of trespassing charges. Linda testified about filing a complaint with the Postal Service, about being reprimanded, about choosing to speak up anyway because someone had to. Sawyer presented medical evidence, photographs of bruises, documentation of malnutrition, expert testimony about what 17 months in those conditions does to a 79-year-old body. Tech presented financial records, every withdrawal, every casino visit, every lie told while Will's pension disappeared. And on day 3, Will took the stand. The prosecutor Torres walked him through it gently. The timeline, the conditions, the recording. Then it was the defense attorney's turn. "Mr. Brennan, isn't it true that you suffer from memory problems?" "No. But my client obtained medical documentation stating you have dementia. That documentation is forged. I've never been diagnosed with dementia. Isn't it possible you're confused about the timeline? That what felt like 17 months was actually—" "I'm not confused." Will's voice was steady. "I know exactly how long I was in that basement. I counted every day, every meal he forgot to bring, every time I heard him walking above me and knew he was choosing not to unlock the door." The defense attorney tried another angle. "Your son was providing you with housing, with care. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted? He locked me in a basement with a bucket for a toilet and let me freeze while he gambled away my pension and planned to collect insurance money when I died. There's no misinterpretation." The courtroom was silent. "I have one more question, Mr. Brennan. If your son was truly trying to kill you, why didn't you try harder to escape before Christmas Eve?" Will looked at Derek, then back at the attorney. "Because for 17 months, every person who tried to help me got shut down. Social workers, pastors, neighbors, a mail carrier. The system failed at every checkpoint. I stopped believing anyone would listen. I stopped believing I was worth saving." His voice didn't waver. "But I was wrong, because on Christmas Eve, I walked 4 miles in a blizzard, and 120 men I'd never met decided I was worth the protecting. So the question isn't why I didn't try harder to escape. The question is why it took strangers on motorcycles to do what the system should have done 17 months earlier." The defense rested shortly after. Jury deliberated for 97 minutes, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted, Maggie sobbing, Reverend Coleman's head bowed in prayer, Linda gripping the bench in front of her. Derek's face went gray. His attorney whispered something. Derek shook his head, stared at the table. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Patricia Morrison, 68 years old, 30 years on the bench, had seen her share of family betrayals. But this one, she said, ranked among the worst. "Mr. Brennan, you exploited your father's grief. You isolated him. You stole from him. You planned to murder him for money. You treated a decorated war veteran like garbage while living off his pension and planning his death." She looked at Derek with something that might have been discussed. "The state recommends 8 to 12 years. I'm giving you 12. No parole eligibility for 8 years. And Mr. Brennan, I want you to spend those 8 years thinking about the fact that your father survived, the frozen chosen survived your abuse, and is currently thriving while you rot in prison." Dismissed. The gavel came down. Derek was led away in handcuffs. Will stood in the courtroom, Carter on one side, Jax on the other, and felt nothing but relief. Not joy, not vindication. Just the exhausted relief of a war finally ending. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Cameras, microphones, questions shouted across the steps. Jax stepped in front of Will. Razor on the other side, creating a wall. "No comment," Jack said firmly. "Give him space." They walked Will to Bishop's truck, drove him home, let him process in silence. That night at dinner, Bishop's kitchen table, pot roast and potatoes, Sawyer and Carter, and Tech joining Will spoke. "Thank you, all of you, for everything." Bishop raised his coffee cup. "Brothers don't thank brothers. We just show up." The others raised their cups too. Will raised his, hand steady now, weight restored, color in his face, and somewhere in that moment, surrounded by men who'd chosen to care, Will understood something fundamental. Family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was leather and chrome and the sound of engines in a parking lot. Sometimes it was showing up on Christmas Eve when everyone else looked away. Sometimes it was exactly what this was. 6 months after the trial on June 24th, 2025, Will stood in the parking lot of Timberline Diner, surrounded by 300 people attending the first annual Veterans Protection Ride. He was wearing a new jacket, olive green like his old one, but without holes, without duct tape. The Purple Heart was pinned in the same place, polished now. His weight had returned to 168 pounds, healthy for his 5'9" frame. His hair was trimmed, his face had color, the hollowness in his cheeks filled in with muscle and life, and regular meals at Bishop's table. He was smiling. The event had been Carter's idea. Turn Will's story into annual action. One day every June, riders across Montana would converge to raise awareness about elder abuse, veteran neglect, and system failures. They'd raised $127,000 this year, half going to Will's long-term care fund, half to Montana Elder Protective Services for training and resources. The local news was there. NBC Montana. Social media influencers who'd seen the original parking lot video now at 42 million views. But the real story wasn't the cameras or the money, it was in the details. 300 motorcycles lined up in formation, veterans wearing their service patches, families holding signs about protecting elders, Maggie Walsh handing out information about recognizing abuse, Reverend Coleman leading a prayer before the ride began, Linda the mail carrier presenting a check from the Postal Workers Union for the Will Brennan Legal Defense and Recovery Fund, because you deserve better, and we're sorry we didn't do more. Will took the check, shook her hand, said, "You did plenty. You tried. That's more than most." At 2 p.m., engines fired, 300 motorcycles roaring to life. Jack stood at the front, leather cut bearing the president patch. He raised his hand. The crowd went silent. Today we ride for every veteran the system failed, every elder isolated and abused, every person who needed help and got turned away. We ride to say that stops now, that we're watching, that brotherhood answers. He looked at Will. And we ride because 6 months ago, one man walked 4 miles in a blizzard and taught us what courage looks like, what asking for help looks like, what surviving looks like. Jax's prosthetic hand came up in salute. 300 hands followed. Will returned the salute, standing there in his new jacket with his Purple Heart gleaming, surrounded by an army that hadn't existed 6 months ago but would exist forever now. The ride lasted 4 hours, through Frost Hollow, past 1847 Pinewood Ridge Road where Will's basement had been converted to proper storage and his bedroom was upstairs in sunlight, past the county jail where Derek was serving year 1 of 12, past Helena Regional Medical, past Bishop's Guest House, past every place Will's recovery had touched, ending back at Timberline Diner for a barbecue dinner and speeches from legislators about elder protection laws being strengthened because of this case. Will sat at the same corner booth, back to the wall, Jax across from him. "How you feeling?" Jax asked. Will thought about it, really thought. Grateful, tired, hopeful, still processing that this is real. It's real. I keep thinking I'll wake up in that basement, that this was all a dream. Jax leaned forward. "Well, you're having dinner with 300 people who showed up because your story mattered to them. You're going home tonight to a warm house that you control. Your son's in prison. You've got $82,000 in the bank from people who wanted to help. That's not a dream. That's what happens when people decide brotherhood matters more than bureaucracy." Will nodded, swallowed hard. "I want to do more, help other people like me." "You already are. This ride, the awareness, the money for Elder Protective Services training, the laws being changed, that's all because you were brave enough to ask for help." "I want to volunteer. At the VA maybe, read to blind vets, visit guys who don't get visitors. Then we'll make that happen." Will smiled. "And I want to learn to ride." Jax's eyebrows went up. "You're 79 years old. I'm 80 in November. Figure I should do it before I'm too old." Jax laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "All right, we'll teach you, but you're wearing full gear, and Bishop's riding behind you the whole time." "Deal." They shook on it, prosthetic hand and flesh hand, brotherhood sealed. Christmas Eve 2025 came cold and clear. Exactly 1 year after Will had walked into this parking lot dying, he arrived at 7 p.m., driving his own truck now. He'd bought it 2 months prior with money from the fundraiser. Nothing fancy. A used Ford. But it was his. He parked, got out, walked into Timberline Diner without a cane. The same waitress from a year ago saw him, did a double take, recognized him from the news coverage. "Mr. Brennan, your booth's ready." The corner booth, back to the wall, where everything had changed. Will slid in, ordered coffee, black, hot, and waited. At 7:47 p.m. the sound started. Distant rumble becoming roar, becoming symphony. 120 motorcycles pulled into the parking lot. Same formation, same precision. But this time Will wasn't approaching them, desperate and dying. This time he was waiting with a smile. Jax walked in first. Saw Will, grinned. "Thought you might be here." Couldn't miss it. Tradition now. The others filed in. Razor, Sawyer, Bishop, Carter, Tech. 20 others, 50 others. The booth filled, chairs pulled over, the diner accommodating what had become an annual gathering. The manager brought out a cake. "On the house. For the man who reminded us what Christmas is supposed to be about." Will looked at the cake, at the words written in frosting brotherhood answers. He looked at the faces around him. Men who'd shown up when showing up was hard, who'd stayed when staying cost them time and energy, and Christmas Eve with their own families. "Thank you," Will said quietly. "All of you, for everything." Bishop raised his coffee cup. "To Will, the toughest son of a bitch we know." Cups raised. "To Will." "And to brotherhood," Jax added, "the kind that doesn't end when you take off the uniform." To brotherhood. They ate cake, drank coffee, told stories, laughed at jokes, and at exactly 9:47 p.m., a man approached the booth, 70-something, thin, wearing a torn jacket, walking with difficulty. He looked terrified. Will saw him first. Something in the man's posture. The fear, the desperation, the same look Will had worn a year ago. Will stood, walked over, extended his hand. "You okay, brother?" The man's eyes filled. I need help. My daughter, I don't know who to." Will put his hand on the man's shoulder, guided him toward the booth, toward Jax, toward 120 men who'd proven brotherhood wasn't a word, it was an action. "You came to the right place," Will said gently. "These are my brothers, and we help people. That's what we do." The man's legs nearly gave out. Will caught him. Jax was already moving, making space, getting coffee, getting warm blankets from someone's truck. The cycle continued. Someone desperate, finding hope in a parking lot full of motorcycles. Someone learning that the dangerous-looking men were exactly who you needed. Someone discovering that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was the bravest thing you could do. Will sat back down in his booth, watched Jax and the others surround this new brother with the same protection they'd given him, and understood something profound. His story hadn't ended on Christmas Eve 2024 when he'd walked into this parking lot dying. It had begun, because now he got to be on the other side, got to be the one who showed up, who stayed, who proved brotherhood was real. The wooden cane still hung in Hell's Angels Montana clubhouse, with the plaque Bishop had made, and last month they had added a second plaque below it. Not all battles are fought on foreign soil. Some happen in basements in silence and isolation. Brotherhood means showing up for those fights too. This is our promise. This is our mission. This is who we are. William Brennan, 80 years old Korean War veteran, chosen reservoir survivor, looked around Timberline Diner at the family he'd found when family failed him, at the brothers who'd answered when he asked, at the life he'd rebuilt from ashes, and knew with absolute certainty that Martha would be proud, that his brothers from Chosen would understand, that the 19-year-old boy who'd earned a Purple Heart dragging wounded Marines to safety would recognize the 79-year-old man who dragged himself 4 miles through a blizzard to save his own life. Same courage, different battlefield, same brotherhood, different uniform. Outside, snow began to fall. Light, gentle, the kind that made Christmas Eve feel magical instead of dangerous. Inside, warmth, coffee, laughter, stories, the sound of family gathering. And in that corner booth, William Brennan raised his cup one more time. To everyone still fighting, still trapped, still waiting for someone to show up, Jax raised his cup, and to being the ones who answer. 120 cups raised in unison. Brotherhood answers, always, forever, until every cage is empty, until every veteran knows safety, until every person understands they're worth protecting. That was the promise. That was the legacy. That was what happened when one old veteran said 11 words in a parking lot on Christmas Eve. I served at Chosen. I never asked for anything. I'm asking now. Sometimes asking is the bravest thing you can do. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the answer roars into a parking lot with chrome gleaming and leather creaking and refuses to leave until you're safe. Sometimes brotherhood doesn't just answer. It saves your life. And then it teaches you how to live again.